In 2024, more diapers were sold in Japan for adults than for babies. It's a statistic that sounds almost funny until you grasp what that represents. A society that's aging so rapidly that its elderly now outnumber its children by margins unprecedented in human history. Last year, Japan recorded just 686,000 births, the lowest since records began in 1899. In the meantime, over 1.6 million people died. Elementary schools are closing at a rate of 450 per year. And Japan isn't alone in this predicament. Birth rates are cratering everywhere. South Korea's fell to 0.75 children per woman. Italy currently sits at 1.2, and even China dropped to about 1 child per woman, and much lower in major cities like Shanghai. Large swaths of the developed world seem to have collectively decided that having children is just too expensive, too difficult, or just incompatible with modern life. The difference? Many of those countries have turned in some measure to immigration to help offset population declines. Japan, for its part, has steadfastly refused this lifeline. And the mathematics is indisputable. Japan needs an estimated 6.74 million workers by 2040 just to maintain modest growth. Yet despite the domestic population collapse, foreign residents make up less than 3% of the population, and the country maintains some of the world's most restrictive immigration policies. So why would a country commit itself to a path of managed decline or outright collapse rather than accept outsiders? Well, the answer reveals something profound about what happens when cultural identity collides with mathematical reality, and why even the most advanced societies can trap themselves in decline they can see, but for some reason just can't stop. Just before we get started with today's episode, AI! Kind of scary, right? Amazon, JP Morgan, Ford, are all cutting jobs. It's 2025. The AI stuff is now, and it's kind of scary. Microsoft even said they could eliminate 36% of their workforce through AI automation. But here's the thing. Instead of being replaced, why not lead the revolution? And that's why I've partnered with today's sponsor, Outskill, to give you free access to their 2-day AI Mastermind this very weekend. It normally costs $895. But Outskill, which is the world's largest education platform on AI, is giving my viewers 1,000 free seats over the next 72 hours. 4 million people have already attended globally, and they're using AI to get those promotions that they so richly deserve. Don't tell people who work for me. Your master prompt engineering, learn 10 powerful AI tools like Make.com and Claude, build AI agents, automate your work, and create apps. Whether you're in HR, marketing, sales, or running your own business, this is for you, so mark your calendars. Saturday and Sunday this weekend, 10 a.m. to 7 p.m. on both days. Sign up now using my link and you'll get $5,000 worth of bonuses, which is a lot of bonuses, including a massive prompt Bible, as well as a money-making roadmap and your personalized AI toolkit. Link in the description and the pinned comment. Check it out before it expires, and well, don't get left behind by AI. Join Outskill this weekend. Links below. Now today's video. Well, so walk through a rural Japanese town and you'll witness a society that's quietly fading away. Children under 15 now make up just 11.1% of Japan's population, less than half the global average of 25%. For the first time in recorded history, there are more Japanese over 80 than under 10. Across the country, elementary schools are closing at a shockingly high rate, that 450 per year. The buildings are being converted into facilities for the elderly, as well as medical clinics and funeral homes. This increasing scarcity of Japanese children creates something of an economic doom loop that should definitely raise alarm bells. Japan's working-age population shrunk by more than 500,000 people last year alone. To put that in perspective, that's like losing the entire workforce of a mid-sized American city every single year. In 1960, there were more than 11 workers supporting each retiree. Today, that number has crashed to roughly 2, and if anything, it's accelerating. And this is something of an economic double whammy, because it's not just that there are fewer young people working who contribute to the social safety net for retirees. The fact that the share of retirees has exploded so much exacerbates this issue considerably. An elderly person over 75 costs the healthcare system around 965,000 yen annually, which is nearly 4 times the 252,000 yen, which is for younger citizens. With the over 75 population set to reach 21 million this year, in a country of 124 million people, the fiscal maths starts becoming genuinely frightening. Take the city of Utashinai in central Hokkaido. Once home to over 40,000 residents in 1955, this isolated city's population has collapsed to just 2,662 as of 2024. This downward decline was not triggered by a single industry's failure. Rather, it reflects the broader structural issues plaguing Japan. Aging populations, extremely low birth rates, and decades of youth migration to urban centers all play a role in carving out the Japanese countryside, and there's nobody there to replace them. The consequences tell their own story. Public services are stretched beyond breaking point. Schools and businesses have shuttered, and entire neighborhoods sit empty or barely inhabited. The city's elderly population, which sits at over 50% of the population, well above even Japan's already high national average, has overwhelmed the local healthcare system. Meanwhile, the shrinking tax base leaves local governments struggling to maintain basic infrastructure, creating a vicious cycle where declining services accelerate further population loss. The infrastructural economics reveal the physical implausibility of managing this decline. The railway company serving Japan's northernmost island, JR Hokkaido, plans to abandon up to 1,237 kilometers of track, which is about half its entire network, and has already closed nearly a fifth of it. Why? Because some trains carry just 9 passengers in the morning. The Sekihoku main line has become infamous. A single high school student boards at an otherwise abandoned station. The train runs at massive losses, but has been kept running to avoid confirming to the public what is already quite visibly obvious. There just aren't enough people. And this is a microcosm for the country's larger dilemma. How do you maintain a modern society when there aren't enough people to sustain a modern society? Now, Japan is hardly alone in terms of facing demographic challenges. Declining birth rates are presenting issues for developed countries the world over, but unlike many of its counterparts on the international stage, Japan has taken a comparatively hardline approach toward offsetting these declines with immigration, maintaining one of the world's restrictive migration policies with a fraction of the foreign-born population. And we're not just talking about European states either, which we've covered the fallout of in another video on this very channel. Tokyo's neighbor, South Korea, has expanded its foreign workforce modestly. As of December 2024, they make up roughly 5.2% of the population, or nearly double the percentage of Japan. Singapore's a bit harder to make direct comparisons to, given its city-state status, but it is renowned the world over for its welcoming immigration policies. Current estimates place its foreign-born residents at over 30% of its total population. And the question isn't whether Japan needs immigration. The maths speaks for itself on that front. Rather, it's a question of why a country facing certain demographic catastrophe won't budge from a path that clearly isn't working. The economist Simon Kuznets put it succinctly when he said, "There are 4 kinds of countries in the world: developed countries, underdeveloped countries, Japan, and Argentina." While perhaps a bit of a simplification, we have to give this other Simon high praise when he points out just how unique of a position Japan finds itself in, although this has begun to thaw a bit over the last few decades. Now, to understand Japan's paralysis on immigration and why it remains such a taboo, we have to go back quite a way. The country went through a period of over 200 years of radical isolation between 1639 and 1853, called the Sakoku period. Literally, this means chained country, and it implemented extreme policies. Japanese citizens were forbidden from leaving the country under penalty of death, which was enforced. Foreign ships approaching Japan were fired upon, and any trace of foreign influence was suppressed. The only exception was a tiny Dutch trading post near Nagasaki, but even here, they had to stay on the artificial island rather than come to the mainland. Even after American gunboats forced Japan to open in the 1850s, the country's approach to modernization was pretty selective. The spirit of the times was summed up with the phrase, "Western technology, Japanese spirit." As Japan's imperial ambitions grew, this insularity hardened into something more dangerous. The government promoted the belief that the Yamato race was uniquely pure and backed it up with more than rhetoric. This ideology drove Japan's brutal expansion across Asia from the 1890s through 1945. The conquest of Korea, the invasion of China, and many others were all justified in no small part by a belief in racial superiority that supposedly warranted Japanese dominion over the continent. After 1945 and the fall of the empire, the explicit doctrine of racial supremacy was done away with, for the most part. It did not, however, take away the idea of Japan being a mono-ethnic, culturally unified country, which very much remained a force to be reckoned with in Japanese politics. And this is not something that began to fade away with the passage of time. In 2005, Japanese Foreign Minister Taro Aso did not mince words when he described the nation as one country, one civilization, one language, one culture, and one race. He would later go on to be the Prime Minister. It's worth mentioning, though, that as with so many claims of unified ethnic superiority and homogeneity, the situation on the ground, it's a little more complicated. And Japan is no exception here. While its island status and long period of Sakoku did limit foreign influence, this wasn't a silver bullet. The indigenous Ainu people of Hokkaido still exist, although their numbers have dwindled after centuries of oppression. The most recent report available shows roughly 13,000 self-identifiers belonging to the group, although scholars believe this ranges somewhere between 20,000 and 30,000 nationwide, with discrimination being a leading factor on why they would be reluctant to disclose that identity. Around 409,000 ethnic Koreans, many descended from forced laborers during the colonial period, remain in Japan after generations. The Burakumin, who are ethnically Japanese but were discriminated against due to the impact of impure occupations, number in the millions. Beyond ethnic lines, Okinawans have a distinct culture and history from much of the rest of the country and have faced similar persecution because of it. But Japan's national narrative erases these minorities. When Foreign Minister Aso made his statement 2 decades ago, he was not describing the true reality of the situation. He was enforcing the idea of what he would perhaps like it to be. This centuries-old story of isolation and homogeneity has become something of a psychological prison. The very idea of Japan as anything other than ethnically Japanese feels like an existential threat to national identity. This is the invisible wall that makes immigration reform so difficult here. You can present all of the demographic data you want, show the mathematical certainty of collapse, point to more successful models in Singapore and to a lesser extent South Korea. But when your entire national story is built on being one unique, homogeneous people, when that's been the foundation of the country's identity for centuries, opening the doors feels less like a policy choice and more like inviting an invasion. Yet even this seemingly impenetrable barrier has begun to crack. Despite everything that we've discussed, something interesting is happening that hasn't captured international headlines. Japan is quietly opening its doors. Well, perhaps cracking the door open would be a better way of describing it. But the trend is there. Nevertheless, since 2021, foreign nationals living in the country have jumped 37%, or nearly 1 million people. The cornerstone of Japan's approach has been, and remains, what can be called stealth immigration, essentially bringing in foreign workers while doing their absolute best to avoid using those terms. One such approach has been rolled out through programs like their Technical Intern Program, officially designed to help train foreign workers with skills they otherwise wouldn't have learned at home before sending them back after a few years. Launched in 1993 as a tiny project but expanded considerably since then, the workers haven't exactly been treated very well. Many work for less than minimum wage in positions that domestic Japanese citizens won't touch: agriculture, construction, fish processing, to name just a few. They can't change employers regardless of how they're treated. Their legal status is tied to working for one company, and after 5 years, they gotta leave it all behind. The exploitation runs so deep that in 2022, over 9,000 interns simply vanished, fleeing abusive employers for the underground economy. Now, this program is ultimately set to be abolished in 2027, but it's going to be replaced with something called the Employment for Skill Development. This is more than a rebrand. While not exactly a revolutionary change, it does offer substantial overhaul in terms of quality of life standards that migrant workers will experience. The new program will allow them to change employers, which addresses the worst exploitation and creates clearer paths to long-term residence. When former Prime Minister Shinzo Abe introduced new visa categories in 2018 aimed at bringing in 345,000 workers over 5 years, he insisted that, quote, "this does not constitute an immigration policy." At the heart of these policy reforms has been the doctrine to never, ever say the I word. Regardless of how Japanese politicians would like to categorize it, the 2019 Specified Skilled Worker Visa represents the biggest shift in recent history. Holders can not only renew indefinitely, they can even bring in family members. Walking through certain parts of Tokyo can reveal some of the changes. In parts of Shinjuku and Shibuya, 10% of residents in their 20s are foreign-born. Convenience stores operate in multiple languages. Vietnamese and Nepali are unofficial second languages in Japan's service industry. Construction sites echo with Tagalog. Nursing homes depend on Indonesian and Filipino staff. The transformation is happening, slowly, but it's happening nonetheless. But despite these changes, we have to be honest about the scale of all of this. Japan's foreign-born population has barely budged in recent years, while many counterparts are sitting at 15 to 20%. Even with recent increases, Japan is nowhere near where it would need to be to even level off their workforce decline, currently estimated to be at least 150,000 or more annually. To understand the scale mismatch, consider that Japan's neighbors are already implementing what Japan has done its best to ignore. South Korea, grappling with similar demographic changes, has been quietly building a foreign workforce that now represents 5.2% of its population. For its part, Singapore shows that even high levels of immigration, along with ethnic and cultural diversity, are not destroyers of social cohesion. This creates a fascinating paradox in Japanese public opinion. Public polls in Japan have to be looked at through the lens of whether they use the I word. Those that do show only 23% of Japanese citizens support more immigration. But when asked about increasing the number of skilled foreign workers without using the I word, support jumps to 62% as of 2024. Japan's caution, while rather extreme, isn't entirely irrational. For years, they have looked at the migration situation going on in Europe with alarm. To their credit, there are a lot of lessons that can be learned by how Europe has handled the crisis, something that we've covered on this channel before. Germany's decision to accept over 1 million refugees after 2015 transformed both domestic and continental European politics and raised genuine concerns for onlookers abroad. The rise of the far-right Alternative for Deutschland to being one of, if not the most popular parties in the country by capitalizing on immigration has real-world implications for policymakers. There were real social costs that made such an influx deeply unpopular: housing shortages, overwhelmed schools, and lengthened waiting times for doctors, just to name a few. The financial burden was something else entirely. Amidst a stagnating economy, Germany has started to export some of its own people. Since 2010, over 700,000 Germans have left the country. There was almost no preparation put into these efforts. There was little thought put into accommodation or integration, with little support to even learn the language. The result was predictable: parallel societies, concentrated poverty, and political radicalization. And for Japan, the lesson is real clear here. Avoid sudden, large-scale influxes that overwhelm existing systems. The 2015 images of chaos at European borders, train stations packed with migrants, and streams of largely young men making their way across the countryside on their way to Germany would confirm every Japanese fear about immigration. And this shouldn't be taken to mean that immigration everywhere and anywhere will fail, though. Both Singapore and Denmark show that it can work when managed properly. Singapore maintains strict controls with genuine integration pathways, preventing the social segregation that has created problems internationally. Denmark has adapted its approach over time, balancing its refugee obligations with more of an emphasis on integration requirements, such as language tests and mandatory assimilation courses for children born to foreign parents. They also invest heavily in welcoming migrants and providing a pathway to permanent residence that can be mutually beneficial. Successful workers can transition to permanent residence and eventually citizenship. The message is clear. With a positive incentive structure: contribute and you're one of us. Japan's current approach guarantees neither the benefits of immigration nor protection from its risks. By maintaining a caste of temporary workers that leave after a few years, they ensure that these workers never become Japanese, but rather something of a disconnected, isolated underclass with no investment in Japanese society. Workers who know they must leave have little reason to integrate themselves. They will, after all, never be Japanese. It's a cycle of circular logic that doesn't seem to provide much benefit to anybody. Even the reformed programs that we mentioned maintain this self-defeating temporariness. The new SSW visas provide paths to renewal, but are anything but guaranteed. Integration support remains minimal. No systematic language education, no cultural orientation, no pathway planning. Japan wants the labor, but not the laborers. They want the work, but not the workers. But perhaps the biggest issue with this stagnation is that demographics don't do gradual. Japan's working age population is not gracefully declining. It's more akin to it just falling off a cliff. The debt-to-GDP ratio, which has long been some of the highest in the world, is set to explode without dramatic intervention. The longer they kick this can down the road, the worse it's going to get. We've learned lessons from countries like Germany and France about the challenges of rapid, large-scale immigration. Japan is fortunate enough to not absolutely need immigration on such a scale, but every year it waits to put such a plan into motion is another year of worsening demographics domestically. This approach is like trying to bail out the Titanic with buckets. It might make policymakers feel like they're doing something, but the ship is sinking. We have a hard time envisioning a pathway out of this crisis that doesn't involve increasing immigration, or should we say foreign workers, considerably. But to be clear, immigration isn't the be-all, end-all solution here either. Like the economist Simon Kuznets mentioned earlier, Japan's economic uniqueness is contributing considerably to this decline and must be addressed to truly understand how the country got here and how to prevent it from happening again. The truth here is that even if Japan threw open its borders tomorrow, it wouldn't be enough, because the country's demographic crisis is just one symptom of a deeper problem. And without getting to the root cause of that, immigration would just delay the symptoms. So let's start with how young Japanese enter the workforce, because it perfectly illustrates the problem. Here, your entire professional life is essentially determined at age 22 through a system called shikatsu, which literally translates to job hunting activities. Companies hire fresh university graduates exactly once a year in April. Miss that window, you're not just out of luck for a year, but actually you're marked as an irregular worker. This process is almost ritualistic. Students wear identical black suits, attend mass recruitment events, and compete for positions at major corporations that promise lifetime employment. Get hired by Mitsubishi or Toyota at 22, and you're just about set for life as long as you deliver for the company. They'll train you, promote you depending on where you do best, and take care of you until retirement. Once inside the company, many don't even have much control over the direction their careers will take. If the company thinks that you'll perform better in a certain department, that's where you go. There's not really much opportunity for individual desire on these fronts. And this creates a system that offers next to zero flexibility. Want to change careers at 30? Too bad. Other companies won't hire mid-career professionals for permanent positions. This rigidity creates cascading effects throughout society, which immigration alone isn't going to fix. Take the Fritas, a combination of the English word free and the German word Arbeiter for workers. These are roughly 12% of the workforce trapped in permanent temporary employment because they missed the new graduate hiring window. They hop between convenience store jobs and short-term contracts, earning maybe half of what their regularly employed peers make. Such a system is disastrous for someone who might not have their life completely together at just 22 years old. To be clear, this is millions of people we're talking about here. How many of these people operating under a slightly less strict system that gave them the opportunity to succeed later in life would have gone on to start families? In a demographic crisis as severe as Japan's, such a system just can't be sustainable. And then there's the rather unique phenomenon of hikikomori, an estimated 1.5 million people, oftentimes men, who have withdrawn from society completely. They often live in total isolation with their parents and rarely leave their rooms. Many of these men are part of a group of people who didn't get a career at 22. While not exactly a rational response, it's a bit more understandable to see how they've largely just given up on life after being told that their lives are forever off course. Women face an even starker choice. The lifetime employment system assumes you'll work continuously from 22 to 65, putting in regular overtime hours. While the government has made slight reforms to try to make companies provide more accessible maternity leave, far too many women today are simply forced to choose between their career and starting a family. The system can't handle a woman who chooses to start a family. Stories abound of women who are simply locked out of the workforce after having children, regardless of their skills or work ethic. And the government isn't blind to this. They've tinkered with reforms for decades at this point, encouraging work-style reforms, trying to reduce overtime culture, and encouraging maternity leave. But these are surface-level changes that don't touch the underlying structure. And this is where immigration plays into this. Yes, on a purely numerical level, immigration could help stop the bleed of their demographic decline. But for how long? Let's say the country starts taking in more immigrants. Putting aside the fact that they're locked out of a lot of jobs because they weren't in the country for shikatsu, some may be willing to overlook this as they're not technically an irregular worker. Beyond that, though, even if they do fully integrate into Japanese society, they're going to find themselves in the same dilemma that native-born people are, choosing between career and family. Immigration is needed to help Japan stabilize this collapse, but to present it as some sort of miracle cure would be wrong. It isn't. Japan has a lot of domestic issues that are driving its citizens to this demographic cliff. And in Tokyo's defense, it's not exactly alone here. The cost of living crisis has impacted young professionals the world over, but Japan really has done it like nobody else. So Japan faces a demographic reality unlike any modern nation has encountered. The speed and scale of population collapse from 128 million to a projected 60 to 70 million by the end of the century is significant enough to be categorized as a peacetime demographic catastrophe. The tragedy isn't that Japan lacks options. Singapore shows how Asian nations can integrate immigrants while maintaining social cohesion. South Korea is facing similar challenges and it's doubled its foreign population. Even within Japan, businesses in sectors that are less popular to work in amongst its citizens hire desperately whenever the rigid system allows. The global implications extend beyond Japan's borders. As the world's third largest economy risks implosion, as a key American ally hollows out, the reverberations will be felt worldwide. Japan's experience previews what happens when societies become too inflexible to survive. The worst part of it all is that Japan knows exactly what's happening and where this all leads. They have the data, the projections, and the examples of what works elsewhere. They also have the wealth and the technology to manage immigration better than almost anyone, and they're still twiddling their thumbs. Thank you for watching.